Hello and welcome to my breakdown and review of Mushoku Tensei Season 2, Episode 1 proper. Now this episode covers the prologue, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 titled The Broken-Hearted Magician, which is also the title of our episode, and The Luster Grizzlies. And I just want to start preliminarily here saying this was a really solid episode, very well adapted from the source material. Going to be quite difficult for me to come up with any actual criticisms that don't just sound like nitpicking. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of get that out there in the open. It's a pretty good episode, but let's break it down. The episode starts off covering the prologue, which is essentially Rudy's trip up north. When we last left Rudy, we could see that he was pretty well dejected and ultimately having really just one goal of trying to find his mother, not really much else. And no real other direction. And since it's not explained super well in the anime, Rudy and these adventurers are hitching a ride up north in exchange for their protection for this caravan they are traveling in. Not wanting to have an utterly silent trip all the way up north, we see one of our female characters attempt to strike up a conversation with Rudy, and he's kind of not having it, doesn't really want to listen to her. But he humbles her nonetheless, and even when he gets a little bit short, we have a second female character who gets a little bit snippy with him, and already noticeably, Rudy makes some comparisons to Eris, which we'll find that, a couple different times during this episode. There are some cool lore bits where we are told a bit about the Kingdom of Renoa, which we will be visiting later on, the Duchy of Neris, and the Duchy of Basharant, which is where we are headed. When we arrive in the city of Rosenberg, I thought everything looked great, like the size of the city is just how I would have imagined it. The unloading of the caravans, with it being like a barter or trade type city, was really well done. Now we see Rudy set off to find an inn, and that's like his first objective. Another interesting tidbit, though, from the light novel, the name of our inn is the Round Shield Inn. And this isn't explicitly stated in the anime, but there is just a frame or two where they show the signage for the inn as a round shield. So I thought that was really cool. Something I noticed right away. I was like, oh, that's pretty sweet. Additionally, this was an inn that is aimed at ranked B adventurers. In the light novel was explained by Suzanne, the female from the caravan, that the cheaper inns for rank C and lower don't come with heating, so there is the potential that you could freeze to death. Next scene, we see Rudy go in full emo mode, locking himself in his room, turning off all the lights, curling up in a ball, holding on to a lock of Eris's hair. Yeah, this guy is big Sag. Now, one thing I will give this episode a little bit of criticism about is in the light novel, it is at this point where Rudy comes up with a rough ideal of what he wants to do to try and find Zenith. He basically wants to try to make a name for himself or get famous, so his name gets around, so if Zenith or anybody that knows Zenith can come and find him. I know, not maybe the greatest ideal, and even in the light novel, I think he does think to himself, it has a very unlikely chance of working, but this was his plan, and it's kind of ignored during this episode. But I do think we'll probably hear about this, or they will incorporate this in a later episode. The next scene really well done and also very true to the light novel, where Rudy goes to the Adventurers Guild to essentially disband Dead End his party. Upon entering the Adventurers Guild, gets lightly heckled, and then a lot of people around him kind of notice what's going on, and they think his party's dead and he's like the last remaining survivor. So that's also like not exactly what happened, but a really well done scene, very faithful to the light novel. And then he attempts to pick up a quest. Now there are 3 quests available, 1 A rank quest and then 2 B ranked quests. The Luster Grizzly quest is the ranked A quest, even though Luster Grizzlies are ranked B monsters. I believe it has to do with the pack size, and the fact that it was a quest to kill a group of them is what made it an A ranked quest. And he's invited to join Suzanne's team, the female from earlier, to take on the quest together. Sarah, the other female that was present during the carriage ride, noticeably not happy about Suzanne's decision. Regardless, Rudius agrees to join them, after some convincing. Everyone meets up early the next day at the gates of Rosenberg, preparing to set out on the quest. And this is when we are formally introduced to all of our new characters. They are the B-rank team Counter Arrow. They consist of Suzanne, the co-leader, who is a warrior, Timothy, who we end up later finding out is the actual leader, and he is a mage, much like Rudius, though a more offensive type mage, Mimir, who is the healer, but also has a beginner rank in detoxification. Actually, he's intermediate rank in healing and beginner rank in detox. Patrice is a warrior mage with beginner wind spells, and Sarah, who is an archer. Now, this is the first time we've ever seen an archer, and I don't really think we have too much in terms of like intermediate rank or any of those type of things. Like, for instance, how we have other ranks for sword god style. We don't have a whole lot of that information-wise for an archer. And I think really, up to my knowledge, Sarah was the first introduction of an archer at all, which I think does make a lot of people like her. She's just unique in that respect. Also, interestingly enough, we don't really get a whole lot of information as to like Suzanne or Patrice's sword style. Like it's never explained whether they're sword god style, water god style, anything like that. I mean, I think same with Timothy. I don't think we ever got his exact rank as a mage. So Counter Arrow, while being a really cool team, we don't get a whole lot of information about them. At least not detailed information. Now, one thing that stood out to me that I really enjoyed about this scene that maybe a lot of people missed, so feel free to go back and watch this, but it's when Rudius gives his introduction, and he states that he is a magician who can do incantationless casting. You notice that all the mages in the group, Timothy, Mimir, and Patrice even, their ears all kind of perk up when they hear that, like, what? You don't have to use incantations? And I just thought that was really cool, like that they had that type of detail to add that animation when Rudy goes over that. Because yeah, it's a big thing, so. Suzanne offers a handshake to Rudius before they set out, but doesn't get one in return. Next up, we have another scene with tsundere Sarah, and a direct comparison with Eris. We also find that a large reason Counter Arrow has invited Rudius along with them on this adventure is to help teach Sarah that she can't be so picky, and that in the event she ever has to team with new members, this is an exercise to teach her how to interact. We also get a nice little campfire scene where Timothy is explaining to Rudius the weaknesses of the Luster Grizzlies, but we can see Rudius already has the answer for Timothy, thus showing that Rudius has done his homework, and Timothy notices that. So I thought that was really cool that they put that in this episode as well. Rudius also expresses some interest in doing a little bit more for the team. However, Sarah shuts that shit down almost instantly. She is not having any of Rudius. We get a scene with Rudius and Timothy all by themselves, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about this scene. Apart from in the light novel, Rudius actually just went out to take a piss, and then Timothy followed him and decided to spark up a conversation. Next up, we get our battle with the Luster Grizzlies, and a couple different things I want to talk about on this one. We see Timothy begin to spam his magic spell, and it is called X-Flame or Exaflame. But in the light novel, this is called Great Fireball, so I thought that was a little weird that they just changed the name there. Additionally, Rudius casts Quagmire, and it's just it's a little hard to tell what's actually happening, like how he's trapping the Luster Grizzlies or slowing them down in mud. And I think this is something they probably should have shown a little bit better, just visually. I could see some people being confused as to what magic spell Rudius was casting here. I know because I've actually seen on a couple different places, Twitter and a couple videos, where people thought he was like dousing them in oil to make them more susceptible to fire, so regardless, they get flanked by some Luster Grizzlies that are covered in mud. Sarah didn't see them, thus making this kind of her fault. And we get a couple of really cool pieces of animation that I did want to give credit to the animators for, because one, I'm seeing a lot of people not talk about, is this scene where Suzanne gets knocked back and you see her just take a huge shot and her sword goes flipping and spinning. And I thought that was animated so well. Like, I really enjoyed that. But then also like the 360-degree cinematic view of everybody doing their best Avengers impersonation. Rudius finally snaps out of his funk that he's been in, and after seeing the members of Counter Arrow fight for their lives, has his spark reignited. And just as they are about to get overwhelmed, he decides to finally step up, and we see him use an attack, which is called Exodus Flame in the light novel, to wipe out the remaining Luster Grizzlies. And Suzanne finally gets that handshake from Rudy, now everybody's friends. We get a short scene with everybody returning to Rosenberg and entering the Adventurers Guild, and thus finding out why Timothy is the leader that he is, as he quenches everybody's jealousy with a free round on Counter Arrow. And undoubtedly, the ending of this episode was probably its highest point, as we see Rudy acknowledge that he hasn't truly lost everything, even though he has lost Eris. He decides to throw her hair in the fire, and we get a great little montage of Roxy and her teachings and being one of the main reasons that Rudy finds the strength to go on. Great outro song as well. I've heard a couple different people, kind of on the fence about it. I really loved the outro. I think it's great. Overall, I think the episode was great. Give this one probably an 8 out of 10. It was adapted really well. They didn't skip anything. I don't feel like they cut anything that was crucial. So another great episode, and I can't wait for the next one titled The Forest in the Dead of Night. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, would appreciate a like and subscribe. And I'd love to hear what your guys' opinions are on this episode and the future of this season. If I missed anything, be sure to leave that down in the comments as well.